I have told this story to no one. I am not certain I fully understood it myself until the night I rode through a November storm with no lantern and a horse I was pushing too hard, and realized that a man can spend 3 years being a fool in a very quiet, very dignified way, and never once notice, because the woman bearing the weight of it is too composed to let him see what it costs her. Her name was Anwin Holt. She came to Velmere in the October of my 39th year, as a companion to my aunt, Lady Marin, who had broken her wrist in a fall from the mounting block, and refused to convalesce without what she called a sensible woman nearby. Anwin was the niece of the rector at Whetstone, 2 counties west, a place of no consequence, in the minds of people who measure consequence by acreage. She arrived on the Tuesday coach with a single trunk, a gray wool traveling cloak that had been mended at the left cuff, and a quality of stillness about her that I noticed before I had yet exchanged word with her. I was the Duke of Velmir. I had inherited the title at 22, survived a war I did not speak of, and managed my estate with the kind of efficiency that men describe as admirable and women describe as cold. I was not unkind. I want to say that plainly. But I had learned, somewhere on a field in the north of France, I think, or perhaps earlier, in a house where warmth was not reliably on offer, that the safest distance between oneself and ruin is to need very little. Hold what you are responsible for, and hold it tightly, and name nothing else yours. Anwin Holt undid that, and she did it so quietly that I was 3/4 undone before I registered to the process. She read to my aunt in the mornings. She walked the kitchen gardens in the gray afternoons, not wandering aimlessly but looking at things. The last dahlias going to seed, the espaliered pear against the south wall. With a kind of serious attention that I found at first merely interesting, and then, gradually, essential. She argued with my housekeeper about the fire laying in the east corridor, and was right, and did not make a performance of being right. She asked me, one evening, about the painting in the library, a dreary ancestor in a red coat, and listened to my answer as though it was worth hearing. I gave her very little. I want to be clear about that. I was civil. I was occasionally present at dinner, I answered when spoken to, but I did not name what she was to me. She had come as a temporary arrangement, my aunt's wrist, 6 weeks, then home to Whetstone. 6 weeks became 4 months. 4 months became the better part of a year. My aunt recovered fully and found, as aunts sometimes do, that she required company still. Anwin stayed. I told myself it was a matter of convenience. The house ran better. Lady Marin was easier. Someone else read the household accounts and caught the error in the coal merchant's invoice that my steward had missed. I told myself that her presence at the breakfast table, the way she poured tea, as though it were simply the next right thing to do, the small pile of books she kept beside her chair, the fact that, when she laughed, it happened in her eyes first. I told myself that was simply pleasant background warmth, the kind one notices in a well-kept room. I never told her she was necessary. The second autumn came. The leaves went from the oaks along the south drive, and I remember standing at the library window one morning watching her cross the gravel towards the kitchen gardens, her dark hair pressed by the wind across her cheek, feeling something that I identified at the time as merely proprietary, a landowner's satisfaction at what belongs within his walls. I know now what it was. I said nothing. She asked me once very quietly, over the accounts one November evening. The fire had burned down, and neither of us had called for it to be built up, and the room had grown close and shadowed between us. She asked whether I thought she might have a purpose at Velmir, beyond the temporary. She said it without want in her voice. She was asking a practical question, and she was asking it, I think, because she needed to know whether she ought to continue hoping, or whether she ought to begin, quietly, to stop. I told her that arrangements at Velmir were always subject to review. I have not forgiven myself for that sentence, and I don't expect to. She thanked me, as she thanked me for everything, with perfect composure. She went back to the accounts. I stood and said something about an early morning, and left her there with the fire gone to ash, and I did not sleep, and I told myself that was simply the cold. The morning she packed I knew before I was told. There is a particular quality to a house when someone in it has made a decision, a kind of resolution that moves through the rooms differently to ordinary purpose. I came down early to find Mrs. Peel, my housekeeper, occupied in the upper corridor, with a look that meant she disapproved of something that was not her place to name. I walked to the door of the east sitting room, which Anwin had been given as her own. The trunk was on the floor, half filled. Her books were off the shelf. The small blue vase she had bought at the Whetstone Market the summer before, the one she kept on the windowsill with a sprig of whatever was currently being produced by the kitchen garden, was wrapped in cloth and sitting beside the books. She was folding a gray wool shawl when I appeared in the doorway. She looked up once. She did not look surprised to see me. "I thought I might catch the Thursday coach," she said. "It leaves from the Anvil at 9:30. I have written to my uncle." I stood in the doorway. I have stood at the edge of cold rivers. I have stood at the mouths of artillery smoke and known what was coming. I stood in that doorway and looked at a woman folding a shawl with precise, unhurried hands, and I found I had nothing to say that was adequate to the moment, and I said nothing. She finished folding the shawl. She laid it in the trunk. She looked at me then, not with anger, not with grief, but with the clear, settled look of a person who has already completed a long piece of interior work and has nothing left to prove by it. "You have been very kind," she said, "in your way." And then she asked very gently whether I might send word to the stable to have the gig brought round for 8:30. I sent word to the stable. I watched the gig carry her out through the gate in the south wall. I stood at the library window, the same window where I had watched her cross the gravel, and told myself it was proprietary satisfaction, and I felt the shape of the house change around me as she passed through the gate, and I understood, in the way one understands a thing one has already known for a very long time, that I had just let the only irreplaceable thing in my life climb into a gig and drive away, because I had not known how to say so out loud. I saddled the horse myself. My groom protested. It was past 7 in the evening, and the sky had come in thick and cold. I did not wait for a lantern. I rode south and west, and the rain began before I had cleared the park, and I rode through it. I found the rectory at Whetstone 2 hours after dark. There was a light in the front window. I was wet through and aware that I had not composed what I intended to say. I, who had managed an estate of 12,000 acres and a war, and 39 years of keeping my own counsel, had ridden 50 miles in the November dark without a single prepared sentence. The rector answered the door himself. He looked at me for a long moment in the lamplight, the Duke of Velmere, soaked, and without a calling card, and apparently in some distress, and then he stepped aside without a word, and showed me into the parlor. She was reading by the fire. She stood when I came in. She did not look surprised, quite. But there was something in her face that had not been there that morning in the doorway, a held-back quality, a waiting, and I understood that the decision was not yet finished, that she had packed and left and ridden away and was still, even then, allowing for the possibility that I would find a way to speak. I did not manage anything graceful. I told her that I had been wrong to say nothing. I told her that the house was different without her, and that I had known it would be, that I had known for longer than I had any right to admit without shame. I told her that I could not offer her poetry, or a history of demonstrated feeling, that I had spent too many years keeping everything necessary inside the minimum radius required for it not to be taken. But I told her, as plainly as I knew how to speak plainly, that she was not convenient or temporary, or background warmth, that she was necessary, that I had ridden through a dark and a storm to say so, because I had not, it turned out, any intention of her becoming a thing I once had and failed to name. She was quiet for a moment. The fire made its small sounds. "That," she said, "is the longest speech I have ever heard you give." And then she reached up and pressed her hand once, very briefly, to the side of my face, cold from the rain, and left it there long enough for me to know that the answer was yes. We were married in the spring, in the church at Whetstone, with her uncle presiding and my aunt in the front pew, looking as though the entire sequence of events had been her idea, from the beginning. Anwin wore a gown the color of the first primroses, and she carried no flowers. And when she took my hand at the altar, she looked at me exactly as she had looked at the espalier pair against the south wall, with serious attention, as though I were something worth understanding. I have never felt, since that day, that I needed to hold everything at arm's length to keep it safe. The thing worth keeping, it turns out, is not kept by distance. It is kept by speaking, plainly and on time, before a gray November morning and a half-filled trunk make the decision for you. I was 51 years old before I learned that. I consider myself fortunate that she was still, as it happens, in the parlor.